Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us again tonight. It's really fantastic to see so many people out here week after week. It's really exciting. So I'm so pleased that you could join us, and I'm particularly pleased that you could join us for tonight's webinar because I have to say that warblers are kind of a favorite of mine. So last week, Jenna got to talk about raptors, which are her favorite. Now I get to do the warblers, which are my favorite. I think people are still coming in. But I think we're going to go ahead because as I was just telling Jenna, there are a lot of warblers. And so we've got quite a bit to get through tonight. Last year when we did this, we did go a little bit over time. I'll do my best to get through things a bit more quickly this time. However, if you need to go, I totally understand, and that's fine. That's not a problem. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these webinars before, my name is Catherine Dale, and I'm the coordinator of the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. And with us also tonight is my colleague, Jenna McDermott, who is showing up as Birds Canada Atlantic because she started this webinar for us. And Jenna is the assistant coordinator of the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. We both work for an organization called Birds Canada, and I know that many of you have heard this spiel now, but Birds Canada is Canada's voice for birds. That's our tagline. And we're the leading science-based bird conservation organization in the country. So we're a national organization whose mission is to advance the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of Canada's wild birds and their habitats. This is obviously a fairly large task, and one of the major ways that we do this is by engaging the public. So a lot of our programs benefit from the participation of citizen scientists, people like yourselves who contribute their skills and their time to help us keep track of what's going on with Canada's bird populations. And so each year, we have more than 70,000 volunteers who participate in Birds Canada programs across the country. Here in Newfoundland, we currently run two programs. The first program, which is sort of our biggest program, is the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. And we will talk more about this project and in great detail about this project at the end of this series. But for now, I'll just say that it is an effort to map the distribution and the abundance of all of the species of birds that breed on the island of Newfoundland. So for example, if you see a picture of a yellow warbler here, and that map shows all of the places in Newfoundland where yellow warblers have been found breeding or where we suspect they're breeding. And so this is a major citizen science project, and we are always looking for volunteers to sign up. The other project that we run here in Newfoundland is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. This is a little bit of a different survey. So while the Newfoundland Atlas will go on for 5 years, the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey is a long-term survey, which takes place every spring between the 1st of April and the 15th of May. And what happens in the Nocturnal Owl Survey is that volunteers go out just one evening within those 6 weeks and drive a route of 10 stops that are about 2 kilometers apart. And at each stop, volunteers will get out of their car, play some owl calls, and listen to see who responds. And so this is another survey where we're always looking for volunteers. And actually the Nocturnal Owl Survey is just ramping up at the moment because we need to get our, well, I was going to say ducks in a row, but I guess it's owls in a row for the beginning of the survey in less than a month. So if you're interested in volunteering for that survey, you can sign up online or you can send me an email. Okay, and of course, before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our supporters and partners. This is a huge project. There's no way we would be able to accomplish it without the help of many, many organizations who provide in-kind support and financial support. And in donating to the Atlas, you can also do that on our website. We accept donations of any size. Without partners like this, we would not be able to put on these workshops, so we really do appreciate their help. And finally, I did want to make a land acknowledgement before we started. The lands where we conduct the Breeding Bird Atlas, as well as the Nocturnal Owl Survey, are the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose people have been erased forever. Additionally, the island of Newfoundland is the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. These people have been protecting and stewarding the land here since time immemorial, and through the work of the Breeding Bird Atlas, we hope to contribute to the stewardship and the efforts to protect all the species that we share this island with. Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. We support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. And if you're interested in learning more about the ancestral lands you live on, you can check out nativeland.ca, which is a great place to start. Okay, so now we will move on to the warblers, the topic of tonight's presentation. And as I said, there are quite a few that we have to get through. The family of warblers is Parulidae, and these guys are small, active birds. They've got thin, short, pointed bills, and they're often very colorful, which is partly probably why I love them so much and why I enjoy this presentation. It's also why they're sometimes referred to as the jewels of the forest. Most warblers are insectivores, so they only eat insects, which explains why most of them don't stick around here in the winter. And most species are arboreal, so they're found in the trees. Okay, and I'm going to get right into them. So tips for identifying warblers. The first is that you want to look at their size. So I said they're small birds, and they are all small birds, but they do vary in size. So keep an eye on that. Look at the size and the shape of the bill. Look at the length of the wings and the tail. So specifically the length of the wings relative to the tail can help you a lot. Of course, coloration is really important. So some places you maybe want to focus your attention. You can look at their faces to see what the facial coloring and markings are. You can look at the wing markings. So this bay-breasted warbler, for example, has those two nice wing bars that you can see really clearly. So it's a good idea to look at the wing markings. And then I've said the under tail coverts, which is that little fluffy part you can see under his tail there. And a lot of people don't necessarily look there, or they don't necessarily think to look there, but because warblers are arboreal and are often found up in trees, it's actually usually the bottom of the warbler you can see. You spend a lot of time cricking your neck. It's actually called warbler neck, staring up into trees. And so it's really useful to pay attention to what's underneath the bird that you might be able to identify. It's also important to consider habitat and behavior when you're identifying warblers. And as we've done in previous weeks, I'm going to be focusing on birds that breed, at least occasionally, here in Newfoundland. And in cases where males and females look different, I'm going to show a photo of both. But I wanted to take this moment to just talk a little bit about plumage and molt, because today I'm going to be focusing on breeding plumage. And this is really important to note for warblers because most of them look totally different in the summer than they do the rest of the year. And so I just wanted to talk about how molt works in birds in general, and then how it works in warblers. So I once accidentally described studying molt to a colleague of mine as watching paint dry, which was unfortunate because he was in the middle of doing a thesis on molt. But it's very important for us to understand how this works for birds because it shapes what we see. So essentially, virtually all small birds will undergo one molt per year in the fall, and this is called the pre-basic molt. And after the pre-basic molt, birds are in what we know as basic plumage. And for some birds, that's all there is. They will molt once a year and they don't change their plumage. But some birds, for example, most of our warblers, undergo a second molt in the spring, usually on the wintering grounds before they start migrating. This is known as pre-alternate molt. And birds that undergo pre-alternate molt are then in alternate plumage, and they look totally different on the breeding grounds than they do in the wintering grounds. So this is the case for most of the birds that we'll talk about today. And so we're going to focus on this alternate or breeding plumage. As they're starting to leave in the fall, most of them will have already begun molting back into their basic plumage, and that makes them considerably more difficult to identify. And so I've highlighted a few bird songs today, as we have before, because song is a very useful way to recognize some warblers, especially again, because they're often high up in trees. But we're not going to cover them all today by any means. And if learning a little bit more about bird song and about warbler song is something that you're interested in, and you would like to learn a bit about birding by ear, make sure to come out to our webinar on April 24th. It's the last one of this species, and Jenna is going to provide some tips about how to learn to bird by ear. But I just wanted to say that birds use songs for at least two main reasons. And warblers in particular are known for having different song types for each of those purposes, which are sometimes referred to as A and B song. So birds use songs to attract mates, but they also use them to defend their territories. It's not really something that we're going to get into today, but it's something that I wanted you to think about, because when you're learning birdsong, you have to keep in mind that there isn't just one stereotype song for each species. Most of them have at least 2 songs, and some of them have extremely variable songs. So keep that in mind when I play some of the songs today. With all that being said, we will now actually get into the warbler species that are here in Newfoundland. We're going to start with the ovenbird. This is a pretty chunky warbler. So he's not particularly small and slim, and he's less arboreal than many of them. So you typically see them foraging on the ground in leaf litter, sort of walking with almost a hesitating gait. And these guys are also ground nesters. So the reason they're called ovenbirds is because they build a distinctive dome-shaped nest on the forest floor, which resembles a Dutch oven with a side door. These guys are fairly distinctive, in particular that orange and black striped crown. They also have a white eye ring, which gives them kind of a wide-eyed look. They have an olive brown back and bold black chest spots. They do tend to blend into the forest floor, so this may be another bird that you are more likely to hear than you are to see. And luckily, the song is pretty distinctive. So it's a very loud, insistent teacher, teacher, teacher that gets louder as it goes. They actually sing from quite high up, so they'll sing from tree branches and quite high in the canopy, even though they're ground nesters. So hopefully I'm going to play this song for you now, and you'll hear what it sounds like. So you can hear that they're very loud, and they're often one of the loudest birds you're going to hear, and very insistent. That repeated teacher, 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 teacher. One of the neat things about their song is we only hear those 2 syllables, the teacher, but it turns out that song is actually made of 3 to 5 different notes, and the number of notes in each part of the phrase and how they're sung are actually extremely variable among individuals. So we hear the song and we recognize an ovenbird, but ovenbirds can actually recognize each other's songs as unique calling cards. Okay, so here we have another relatively large, kind of brown and white stripy warbler. So this is a northern water thrush. It has very long legs, and it has a much longer body than the ovenbird does. So the ovenbird was kind of chunky. These guys are a little bit longer. It is a thrush-like bird, which would probably be more helpful if we'd covered thrushes yet, but think of something like a robin. Northern water thrush are extremely common in Newfoundland. They like forest understory, and they like slow-moving or standing water, usually where there are many, many mosquitoes, I have noticed. They like to forage for insects on the ground along the water's edge, and they're often seen bobbing or teetering their tail up and down. So just because I've mentioned this before in my last presentation, which was about the shorebirds, can anybody remind us which shorebird does something similar? You can put it in the chat if you remember that, bobbing of the tail up and down. And while you answer in the chat, and Jenna, I'll let you keep track of that, I'm going to say that these guys are also another ground nester, so you see them on the ground a lot. And for these individuals, you've got a brown back and wings, a heavily streaked breast and belly, and you've got this nice buffy eyebrow. So that sort of whitish eyebrows, quite obvious, stretching above the eye. On some individuals, you may see a yellow wash on the breast and belly, but not necessarily all individuals. And these guys also have a really loud, emphatic song, which falls in pitch and accelerates as they continue. These guys, I had a very hard time getting their song until I realized it reminds me a little bit of a ball bouncing down the stairs. So that's how I remember these songs. Now I'm giving you how I fix these songs in my head, but if you attend Jenna's workshop on the 24th, you'll find that you kind of need to make your own associations for songs because they're often unique to the listener. But nonetheless, I think of a ball bouncing down the stairs when I hear these guys, which sound like this. Okay, and I just wanted to take a moment because these are both ground nesters. They're both kind of browny, streaky birds. So I wanted to take a moment to compare them. So northern water thrush are darker brown overall. So the back is sort of a dark brown versus the kind of golden olive color that ovenbirds have. Ovenbirds have that white eye ring, which gives them sort of a really wide-eyed kind of surprised look, whereas the water thrush have the buffy eyebrow. And then that orange and black striped crown is a really important cue on the ovenbird. Also, you can look for them in different habitats. So that's an important thing to remember. Ovenbirds like mature forests, but northern water thrush are almost always found by water. And I'm curious, I see there are answers in the chat. Jenna, did anybody get the answer about the sandpiper?
Yes, there were several mentions of the spotted sandpiper. Someone also said solitary sandpiper, who also bobs their tail, and also American kestrel, which obviously isn't a shorebird, but also bobs its tail.
There you go. All right, lots of tail bobbers. I was thinking spotted sandpiper, but well done, people. Thank you. Okay, black and white warblers. So these guys are one of the first warblers to arrive in spring, and they are yet another ground nesting warbler. And some of you may remember from the presentation about shorebirds that when you're nesting on the ground, one of your key defenses is camouflage. You don't want your nest to be seen by predators. And it turns out the black and white warblers are very, very good at this. And in fact, I worked in a lab where somebody was studying these warblers and needed to find their nests and had virtually no luck doing it. So they'd actually been watching a pair of them and had the nest narrowed down to 0.5 meter squared on the forest floor, but they could not actually find the nest. You'll see that males and females, while looking quite similar in this species, are a little bit different. So for the males, you're seeing that they have a thin and slightly curved bill. So it's slightly curved down. They are black and white striped. They have a black ear patch, and they have a tail which is dark with white spots on the outer feathers. Females look quite similar. They're black and white striped overall, but they are quite a bit paler. And instead of a stripy throat, they have a white throat. And instead of a black ear patch, they have a grayish ear patch. This song I also really like. It's quite easily recognizable. It's one of the first ones that I learned. And it sounds like a squeaky wheel. That's how you recognize a black and white warbler song. So I will play that for you. It's quite high. So it's got that nice up and down undulation to it, quite high, very squeaky. Okay, and moving on to our next warbler, this is the Tennessee warbler. And for those of you who are paying attention, you'll notice I haven't put the little male and female signs on this. And the reason I haven't done that is we're not entirely sure in these birds that we do have a photo of male and female. So they are quite similar. There are a few little differences here. But overall, the Tennessee warbler is not one of our most colorful or distinctive warblers, but it is quite common. And those of us on the Atlas field team heard quite a few Tennessee warblers this past summer. They like to breed in the boreal forest. They eat mainly caterpillars during the breeding season, but in the winter, interestingly, they also eat nectar. So I said that most warblers only eat insects, but these guys are an exception. And they're actually known as nectar thieves because most species of birds that eat nectar stick their face into a flower, probe it from the front, and then they get pollen all over their faces and spread it to the next flower as they go. But Tennessee warblers actually use that sharp pointed bill to pierce a flower at the bottom, and then they can lap up the nectar without getting any pollen on themselves. So they're kind of cheating. Indications for this rather indistinct warbler: you've got a gray cap and a pale eyebrow. It's yellow-green above and whitish underneath. They're small warblers. They have short tails, and again, they've got that really sharp bill. Sometimes the whitish underside has a yellowish wash. It says generally it's agreed that females are basically the same as males, only duller, but that's a little bit hard when the warbler itself is already fairly dull. So we have asked experts about these, and we think that this is a female, but we're not entirely sure. The hood is not distinct, so you don't have sort of a distinct line between the head and the back. The eyebrow is less distinct than on the top bird, which definitely is a male. So bottom bird is a bit of a mystery. Okay, and moving on to the Nashville warbler. So I have trouble keeping Tennessee and Nashville warblers straight in my head because I think it's very unfair. They're both named after locations. And then on top of that, Nashville actually is in Tennessee, just to confuse things more. And of course, neither of these birds, that isn't the primary place that they're found, but they were actually named because they were first seen on migration. Tennessee warblers, as I said, are pretty common in Newfoundland. Nashville warblers are much rarer, so they are an uncommon breeder. And they're found primarily in regrowing deciduous or mixed forest with shrubby undergrowth. So yes, as I said, Nashville warblers don't breed in Nashville. Tennessee warblers, non-Tennessee, they get their name because they were passing through. So these guys are also small warblers. They've got a nice round head, and again, like Tennessee warblers, they're relatively plain plumage. So for both of them, you'll notice I mentioned wing bars as an important thing to distinguish warbler species. Pay attention to what's going on the wings, and neither of those species have wing bars. Nashville warblers have an olive green back, a gray hood. There is a chestnut crown, and you can see it if you look very closely among the feathers there. You can see that there is kind of chestnut at the base of those feathers on his head. The chestnut crown is not incredibly visible. If it were, it would be easier to distinguish male Nashville warblers. These guys do, however, have a white eye ring, so they do have some facial markings and yellow underparts. And this is a short-tailed warbler. Females generally look the same as males, but paler. And okay, well, moving on to the mourning warbler. Sorry, I thought I had another Nashville warbler slide there. So I love these guys. They're a common breeder in Newfoundland. They're often hard to see. I saw my first mourning warbler here in Newfoundland. These guys like to hang out in dense thickets and undergrowth, and they are among the most renowned skulkers of the warbler family. So they like to skulk around in the undergrowth. So you're more likely to hear them than see them. They do like habitat that's been recently disturbed, so things where fires have gone through, storms, logging activities, and because of this, they can be referred to as a fugitive species, so they have to seek out new breeding habitat as that recently disturbed habitat matures. And something apparently we're playing their song now. So that is the song of a mourning warbler. You've got a nice churry, 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 basically. So these guys, very distinctive. You've got that gray hood. On the males in particular, you have a nice black chest and yellow underparts. And again, you're probably noticing a theme here at this point. You'll notice that the females are paler than the males, and they lack that black chest, but they do have the gray hood. And the other thing I was going to note that's kind of cool about mourning warblers is that, like some of the shorebirds we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, these guys will actually fake a broken wing to draw predators away from their nest. All right, and can I play it again, I wonder? Yes, all right, success. Yeah, so it's that sort of burry, churry, churry, churry noise. Common yellow throat, and I'm realizing that I say this a lot because this is another one of my favorite warblers here. The reason I love common yellow throats is they were among the first warblers that I learned to identify by song. However, I learned in Ontario, and when I moved to Newfoundland, I had to learn all over again because many Newfoundland birds, and the common yellow throat is one of them, have basically their own Newfoundland accent. So they sound a little bit different in Newfoundland than they do in Ontario. You can probably guess from the name that these guys are common breeders, and they really like marshy habitats. So they like low, wet areas with dense vegetation. The males tend to perch on exposed twigs to sing, which is quite useful. The females are also expert skulkers. I went digging for a female, and that's the best photo I could find, and she's clearly pretty in a bush there. So when you're looking at the common yellow throat, the black mask is one of the things that stands out most. They're little robber birds. They have a white border around that black mask, and as the name would suggest, they have a yellow throat. They also have yellow undertail coverts. So these aren't a bird that you usually find yourself staring at the underside of, but it's still useful to know that they have yellow undertail coverts. The females are pretty drab overall. And they're sort of brownish above with a yellow throat and breast, but the brightness of that yellow throat and breast does vary geographically. So the song that the common yellowthroat sings is how we say it is witchity, witchity, witchity. And you'll hear this a lot around marshes. So let's just see if I can play that. And that is a Newfoundland recording of a common yellowthroat, so a little bit different than what you might expect in Ontario. Next up, we have the American redstart, also sometimes called the Halloween bird. In my opinion, and I think the opinion of many people, probably the most easily recognizable of our warblers, particularly the males. These guys are also common in Newfoundland. They like deciduous forests with small tree understories. And these guys, as you can see, they're very brightly patterned, especially the males with their orange and black, and they actually will flash those brightly colored tails and wings to flush insects out of the foliage, which they then chase down to eat. So the male American redstart is mainly black with those bright orange patches on their sides, wings, and tails. The females have kind of a similar pattern, but instead of black and orange, you're looking more at gray and yellow with kind of an olive back. The other thing to keep in mind is that redstarts actually display what we call delayed plumage maturation. So males don't develop those bright orange and black colors until their second breeding season. So that means that they hatch one summer, the next summer they come back, they look a little bit like females. So second year males will have that gray and yellow coloration rather than the black and orange. And then when they come back the next summer, they've grown into that black and orange plumage. So interestingly, those young males, those second year males, will still attempt to hold territories and attract females, but most of them aren't successful until they've gained their adult plumage in the next breeding season. It seems to us, and I have no statistics on this, but it certainly seems to us as an Atlas team that we see an awful lot of immature males here. So I would say, at least what I've been seeing in the field, is probably 3 immature males to every one mature after second year male in that adult plumage. So it's an interesting question as to whether we get an awful lot of those second year males here. I haven't included the song for this warbler, and that is because redstarts are among the most variable of warblers when it comes to song. Actually, they drive me a little bit insane because they often sound a lot like magnolia warblers. They often sound a lot like yellow warblers. They're all over the place. So that's a tricky one to learn. And I just wanted to pause a moment here and talk about something that I think makes redstarts really neat. So I did my graduate work in a lab where they were one of the major study species. I didn't study redstarts, but my close colleague did. And redstarts are well known in the ornithological world for being one of the first species where the existence of carryover effects was demonstrated. And so I've defined carryover effects there, when events in one season affect the outcome of the subsequent season. So this actually seems to make a lot of sense. It doesn't seem like an earth-shattering revelation, but because most migratory birds in North America were first studied in the States or in Canada on their breeding grounds, we tend to know a lot about what happens on the breeding grounds, but very little about what happens the rest of the year, which is kind of silly if you think about it, because we usually have these birds for maybe 2 months, and then they spend the rest of their year elsewhere. It seems really obvious that what happens here on the breeding grounds can affect what happens on migration and in the winter, and vice versa. But that's not how we've tended to study birds. And so this was actually one of the first species where we could actually prove that this was the case. So in redstarts in the early 2000s, there was a whole sequence of studies that showed that males that spent the winter in dry, low quality habitats in the Caribbean did much more poorly the next breeding season than males that overwintered in high quality habitats like mangrove swamps. So there was a really obvious difference in habitat quality in the winter, and then that affected how they did during the breeding season. So it's a really neat story, and it actually ended up basically kickstarting an entire field of study, which was really exciting. Okay, so now we have the Cape May warbler. I saw my first Cape May warbler when we were out in the field this past summer. It was very exciting. These guys are not common birds here in Newfoundland, so they're an uncommon breeder. And in fact, if you look up a range map for the Cape May warbler, Newfoundland is not included. They nest in spruce fir forests, and they are most numerous where spruce budworms are abundant. And so that may give you a clue as to why we're seeing a few more of them here in Newfoundland over the past few years. These guys have larger clutch sizes than many warblers, so they tend to lay 6 eggs in the nest, which is considerably more than some of the other warblers. But one of the neat things about that is because spruce budworms are sort of a cyclic food source, so they tend to increase rapidly and then decrease rapidly, laying so many eggs may let Cape May warblers take advantage of that cyclic food source. These guys, like, blanking here, these guys will also feed on nectar, so they are not just insectivorous. And they actually have a specially shaped tongue, which is curled and semitubular, which allows them to sip nectar from the flowers. And they visit flowering trees in spring, and they will actually defend flowers against other birds. And so you may even see them coming to hummingbird feeders. So these guys, you're looking for that bright yellow collar on the male and then a chestnut cheek patch. They've got black streaks on the chest and flanks, and they've got white greater coverts on the wings and undertail coverts. The females have a grayish cheek patch instead of a chestnut cheek patch. They have an olive gray crown and then a pale yellow breast and pale yellow collar. So again, you see the female being a less dramatic, paler version of the male. And I just wanted to take a moment here because I did mention spruce budworms. So these guys are, they're not invasive, but we do tend to consider them a pet species. So they are the larvae of a native North American moth, and they like to eat balsam fir and spruce. And they start at the top of the tree and eat all of the current year needles, as well as, in some cases, previous year's needles and even cones. And so obviously this is not great for the tree, and they do die, the trees do die off after 3 to 4 years of defoliation. Outbreaks of spruce budworm occur every 30 to 40 years, so they are cyclical and they are part of natural forest cycles. Obviously, as I said, not good for trees, but they are hugely benefiting of what we call the budworm warblers. So that's Tennessee warblers, Cape May warblers, bay-breasted warblers, and Blackburnian warblers. And because we do currently have an outbreak in Newfoundland, that probably explains why we're seeing so much more of these particular species of warblers. Okay, and now we have the northern parula. These guys are common throughout the other Atlantic provinces and generally in eastern Canada, but they are rare in Newfoundland. And they like to build their nests in hanging epiphytes, so air plants, basically, plants that that essentially get their nutrients from the air, from the precipitation. And so we're talking about things like Spanish moss, beard moss, that kind of thing. So when identifying parulas, again, you see that the male is a brighter version of the female. So you see those white eye crescents, not quite a full eye ring, but crescent above and underneath. You've got wing bars on these guys, so white wing bars, a yellow throat and breast, and then a black and chestnut breast band on the males. They have white belly and white undertail coverts. They're very small warblers. They have a short tail, and that tail is often raised, as you can see on the picture of the female there. Again, female, a less flashy male. You don't see any black on the breast band, but you can see a little bit of that chestnut there. And the other thing is that you can look at their bill and you see that the yellow mandible, so the yellow lower mandible or the lower half of the bill, is actually unique to parulas. Okay, and so we've gone from parulas, which are uncommon here, to another of our very common residents, and that is the magnolia warbler. It's very common in the coniferous forest, and if you're remembering back to what I said about redstart song, that I often confuse it with magnolia song, One good way to tell the difference between these two is the habitat. So redstarts we find more in deciduous forests, whereas magnolias really like coniferous forests. They're another weirdly named warbler. You do not see them in magnolia trees, except that in 1810, Alexander Wilson collected a warbler from a magnolia tree in Mississippi, and that's how they ended up being called magnolia warblers. So for these guys, again, they're a fairly striking and colorful bird. You see a white eyebrow and then a black face mask. And they have what really looks like a black necklace on. So they've got almost a ring around their neck with what looks like jewels trailing down from it. So they've got that black necklace. They have a black back, but then a white panel on the wing. And the tail is central white, but it has black patches on the tip, which is useful. And then they have this very bright yellow throat, breast, and belly. Females, again, paler overall. They can have somewhat of a black mask, but it won't be as strong as the males. So you're seeing more of a grayish mask on the female there. They do still have that white eyebrow. And the wing bars on the females are usually thinner. So you can see that on the male, you've got a little bit of a white wing panel, whereas on the female, you almost have two separate wing bars there. And again, they have white undertail coverts. Okay. And here we have the bay-breasted warblers. They're pretty distinctive. There's very little in Newfoundland that you're going to confuse these guys with. They like low elevation coniferous forests with small openings that they can dart amongst. These guys, again, are a relatively uncommon breeder in Newfoundland, but they are one of the budworm warblers. So we have been seeing them with the increasing frequency over the past few years. And in 2020, actually, the first year of Atlas data collection, they were detected likely breeding in Barachois Pond Provincial Park, so in the western part of the island, for the first time in 11 years. So bay-breasted warblers numbers really go up and down depending on outbreaks of the spruce budworm. As I said, very distinct, at least in breeding plumage. So they have this bay or chestnut crown and then a pale nape to the neck. They too have a black face mask, and then they've got that bay throat and breast. So this is one of those useful warblers where the name tells you kind of what you should be seeing. And they have thick, distinct wing bars. So you can see those two clear wing bars on the wings and a dark streaked back. There's really not much you can mistake a male breeding bay-breasted warbler for. Females, again, are drabber and paler than males, but they do have the same dark streaked back. They also have the same thick, clear wing bars, and they have the same, they have some bay on their throat and breast. So variable amounts. You can see, however, on this female here, you do see a little bit of that bay coloration. And just as a heads up, I wanted to warn you that this is one of the warblers that changes most during fall migration. So they actually end up looking like blackpoll warblers, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we will shortly, even though during the summer they look entirely unlike them. Okay, this one may be my absolute favorite warbler, although I don't promise not to say that again. Blackburnian warblers are obviously just stunning. They, again, are not super common here. They like mature evergreen and evergreen deciduous forest, and they are forest canopy specialists, so they tend to be up near the top. So these are definitely a bird that will give you what we call warbler neck, but I think it's worth it to get a crick in your neck staring at them because they're just gorgeous. And in springtime, rival male Blackburnian warblers will actually perform like territorial conflicts by chasing one another through and around the treetops, flying in loops, and then plummeting down towards the ground. And then they will actually glide, slowly flapping in almost a moth-like flight, which is pretty cool to see. But once the territories are established in the spring, these acrobatics do die down. So these are small warblers with a relatively long body, and males have that brilliant flame orange throat and face. There is no other North American warbler that has that bright orange throat. They have a triangular black ear patch and a black crown. Females, once again, you can probably say it with me this time, they are duller and paler overall. But again, you see that yellowish orange throat, You see a yellow eyebrow, which on the male is orange. You see a grayish crown instead of black, and then a grayish triangular ear patch, and 2 white wing bars. Okay, so I've just given you a whole bunch of warblers in a row that I've called relatively uncommon. This is one of our most common warblers, and these are warblers that you can see often in the city. So if you're in St. John's, you will see them all over the place and hear them all over the place in the spring. If somebody ever tells you that they saw a canary when they were out on a walk, this is probably what they're talking about, either this or an American goldfinch. These guys like rivers, so they're found in riparian thickets and young forests, but they also will happily nest along the roads. They have a really wide breeding range, so they breed all across North America into Alaska, but also throughout Mexico and Central America. And again, the name kind of gives it away with these guys. They are bright yellow all over. So very bright yellow bird. They've got a yellow-green back. They don't have any markings on their face, so a very plain face. But males do have those chestnut streaks, so the sort of orangey red streaks on the breast. These guys are, so they're just generally very cheerful little birds. One of my friends once described them as little drops of sunshine. They stand out pretty well. Females are not quite as bright as the males, but they are still yellow all over, and they've got the same yellow-green back, but they don't have those streaks on the underparts. I've got a song here again. Yellow warbler was one of the first songs that I learned, along with the common yellow throat. And when they sing what we call their diagnostic song, so their most common song, it's actually quite easy to identify them. So the song is often said as "Sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet," or "Sweet, sweet, little more sweet." However, you do need to take into account that yellow warblers have highly variable songs as well. So they're really easy when they sing the song that we're familiar with, which sounds like this. But they almost have a sweet tone of voice to them, and given enough time, you start recognizing the tone of a yellow warbler song. Okay, and blackpoll warblers. This is another really common warbler here in Newfoundland. They like the cold, wet regions of the island, and we have quite a few of those. They like balsam fir forests or tuckamore, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Newfoundland, tuckamores are spruce trees bent and entangled by the winds on some of our coastal shores. So they form these really thick, quite short, but very old forests. Very tangly, very difficult to get through. The breeding range of the blackpoll warbler is the farthest north of all of the warblers, and I had never seen or heard these guys before moving here to Newfoundland. So in this case, you can see the male and the female do look quite different. So for the male, primarily you're looking for that black cap. That's actually what blackpoll means. It means black head. And because you're talking about a largely black and white striped warbler, looking for that black cap is one of the best ways to distinguish them from our other black and white striped warbler, the black and white warbler. So they have a black cap, and then they've got this really contrasting white cheeks. They've got white wing bars and black streaking on their back and flanks. And then they have these bright orange legs, which are also diagnostic if you get a chance to have a look at their legs. So that is unique to blackpolls. And that is the case for males and females. So the female, again, looks quite different here. It has a dark eye line and a broken eye ring. It has a finely streaked cap, but obviously nothing like the black cap of the male. And then it's washed all over yellow. And I think that's why they look so different, because the male is much more black and white, although there is some yellow on his wings, as you can see. The females also have those two diagnostic the two bright wing bars there. Blackpoll warbler songs are one of the highest frequency songs of all warblers. So it's very distinctive, but it is actually one of the first ones that you cannot hear anymore once you start to lose your hearing. So it's almost nature's hearing test, if you will. So I will play this. Not everybody's going to hear it, and I don't actually know if I'm going to hear it myself this year. So it's very high pitched, seet, 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 seet. And again, I do like to talk about the cool things for some of these birds. And what I consider probably the coolest thing about blackpoll warblers is that they have one of the longest warbler migrations. So birds in Western North America actually travel 16,000 kilometers from Alaska to Brazil and back every year. And over here on this side of the continent, although they don't have quite as far to fly to make it down to Brazil, the blackpoll warblers here will fly more than 3,000 kilometers straight over water from the northeastern US to the Caribbean or to South America. So that's a nonstop overwater journey of 3 days. And just to be clear, we're talking about a warbler that weighs less than half an ounce, but still holds the record for the longest overwater journey of any songbird. So they do need to stock up on mass and energy before they leave, which is probably exactly what this guy here is doing. He's stuffing his bill full of bugs. Okay. And moving on to another perhaps oddly named warbler, the palm warbler. So these guys are pretty large warblers. They are also common here in Newfoundland, and they like open areas. So things like bogs and fens that have spruce around the border, but a nice open area. But I've noticed them, and we've noticed them in the field along things like power line cuts and on the edges of weedy fields. As I said, it's an oddly named warbler, so like the Nashville warbler. These guys were named based on where they were first seen, which was during the winter in the Caribbean. But it is actually one of our most northern breeding warblers. So the only warbler that has a range that's further north is the blackpoll warbler. And it's estimated that Canada's boreal forest is home to 98% of all palm warblers in the world in the summer. Males and females look the same in these guys, which is why I have only shown one picture. And these guys are a little bit weird in that they don't necessarily act the way we expect warblers to act. So they're actually most commonly seen on the ground, where they forage and they wag their tail to flesh insects. So for these guys, you see that they're yellow all over and they have rusty streaks like the yellow warbler and yellow underparts, but they've got that nice rusty cap and a bright yellow eyebrow, which is quite different than the yellow warbler, which really doesn't have any facial markings. I've got the song here, partly because this is again not necessarily what you think of when you think of a warbler song. So I often think of something very sweet like the yellow warbler. This is a monotonous buzzy trill, a little bit like an insect. And if you're familiar with other bird songs, it can perhaps be confused with a junco sometimes or with a swamp sparrow. Okay, yellow-rumped warblers, another very aptly named species whose name kind of gives away what we're looking for. They're also affectionately known as butterbutts. These guys are very versatile foragers. So they've been spotted foraging, obviously on trees and branches, but also on washed up seaweed on the beach. They will even skim insects from the surface of rivers and oceans. They'll pick them out of spider webs, much to the spider's dismay, and grab them off of piles of manure. And they're really quick to switch to eating berries during the fall and winter. And in fact, the yellow-rumped warbler is the only warbler able to digest the waxes found in some berries like bayberries and wax myrtles. And because of this, yellow-rumped warblers are actually better at staying further north during the winter than most of our warblers. So sometimes even as far north as Newfoundland. But I did some field work in BC in the winter when I was in graduate school, and we had some yellow-rumped warblers that were hanging around in the Okanagan Valley in the snow in February. So most warblers do have to leave because they only eat insects, but these guys are a bit of an exception. So for these guys, obviously the most diagnostic thing is that yellow rump. The male, you've got a black mask and a white throat and yellow side patches. Just a quick side note here, eastern and western subspecies of yellow-rumped warblers look very different. So our eastern subspecies is the myrtle warbler, and that's the one shown here. The western subspecies is called Audubon's warbler, and they have a yellow rather than a white throat, but they do have that classic diagnostic yellow rump. So for the females, you see a white throat also, you see kind of a brown above, somewhat yellow side patches, and again, that yellow rump. And the black-throated green warbler, relatively common here in Newfoundland. It nests in mature coniferous and mixed woodlands. And this is one of those warblers that really likes to be up high in the canopy, like Blackburnian warblers. So another warbler that definitely gives you a cricket in your neck. These guys are dependent on large tracts of coniferous forest, and they become vulnerable when habitat is fragmented through harvesting and insect infestations. So these guys, again, very distinctive plumage. They're a small warbler with a bright yellow face and a dusky ear patch, and then that black throat on the males. They've got black streaking on the sides, and even though I always thought black-throated green warbler was a strange name because they don't look that green to me, they are actually an olive green on the back. They do have a yellow wash across the vent area, which is not necessarily easy to see in either of these photos here, but again, it's true of both males and females, and because you're often looking at these guys from underneath, an important thing to remember. Females, less dramatic males, so they tend to have a white throat instead of a black throat. You can see a little bit of streaking on this one. They've got a dusky ear patch and a yellow face as well, and black streaking on the sides. These guys also have an extremely distinctive song, which tends to be endlessly repeated. So it's a good one maybe to start learning with. One of these guys was actually heard singing 466 songs in 1 hour. The best mnemonic I've heard for this guy's song is trees, trees, I love trees. You can see if you can hear it in there. Apparently, we're now looking at the green back of one. There we go, and white wing bars as well. Trees, trees, I love trees. Okay. And just another moment, we're almost done with our warblers. So I wanted to identify something else that I find really, really interesting about warblers. And just the fact that they were part of one of the really foundational studies in ecology as a field. So many of you have probably noticed that many of the warblers that we are talking about tonight seem to share the same habitat preference. So they all like mature coniferous forest. And when you have a bunch of different species that really like the same habitat, it kind of raises the question of how do they manage to coexist? So they're all trying to get the same resources in the same place. How do all of these species continue to exist? And this is kind of a long-standing question in community ecology, which is the study of species interactions. And so in the 1950s, a Canadian-born ecologist, whose name was Robert MacArthur, set out to answer this question for 5 particular species of warblers that all shared the same breeding grounds in mature coniferous forests. So he was looking at Cape May warblers, yellow-rumped warblers, black-throated green warblers, Blackburnian warblers, and bay-breasted warblers. And he wanted to know how all 5 of them managed to survive in this mature coniferous forest without one outcompeting the others. And so what he found is that although we think of them as living in the same habitat, they don't actually occupy what we call the same ecological niche. So they all live in mature coniferous forests, but they actually divide the available space amongst themselves. So Cape May warblers spend most of their time right at the tops of the trees on the outside. Whereas Blackburnian, which do like high canopy, they were also near the top, but just below the Cape May warblers on the outside of the trees. And then black-throated green, another species which we know likes to be high up, same height as the Blackburnian, but they tended to be more towards the interior of the trees. And then the bay-breasted warblers occupied kind of the middle interior, so that middle area, and the yellow-rumped warblers moved around a lot, but spent most of their time at the base of the trees. So even though we can go into a mature coniferous forest and expect to see all these species, they are actually dividing the space amongst themselves. One of the coolest and most foundational studies of community ecology. Okay, so one of our last species of warblers, here we have Wilson's warbler. Common breeder, but unlike a lot of the other birds that we've talked about, these guys like the understory. They do not like to be up near the top of the trees. And they are actually ground nesters, except in California and Oregon. They like wet meadows, thickets near streams, and they like willows and alders. We tend to see them a lot in alder hedges along roads. And so these guys, one of the cool facts about them is, unlike other songbirds, which typically when the nestlings fledge out of the nest, they leave and they do not come back, Wilson's warbler fledglings will pop out of the nest, but they'll head back for a night or two after they fledge, just to, spend a little borderline millennial. So for these guys, the male Wilson's warbler, the main thing you're looking for is that little black cap there. They're yellow underneath. They don't have the streaks that you see on male yellow warblers, those rusty streaks. They have an olive back, and they have a beady black eye, which is one of those things where you think it's not actually that useful a description, and then you look at the picture of the warbler, and they definitely do have a beady black eye. The females don't have that black cap. They have more of an olive crown. Some of them may have a little bit of black in the middle, but again, you see the yellow all over and then the sort of olive back color and that beady black eye. And I just wanted to take a moment, since this is our last warbler, to talk about the differences between Wilson's warbler and yellow warbler females. So the males are really easy to tell apart. The Wilsons have those little black caps, whereas the yellow warblers have no markings on the head, but then they have those rusty breast streaks. Females are a little bit more difficult, but Wilson's warblers are significantly smaller than yellow warblers. So yellow warblers are a much larger warbler. And they do have that little bit of a crown. So most of the females you're going to see an olive crown. However, in some of them, you may see a little bit of black. And because they have that crown, it looks like they have a yellow eyebrow versus the virtually unmarked face of the yellow warbler female. The other thing you can look at is the edges of the wing feathers. So when you look at the Wilson's warbler, you don't see any yellow on the wing feathers. But when you look at the yellow warbler, you can see a little bit of yellow around the edges. So with that, we're not quite as late as we were last year. We still actually technically have 2 minutes left. And I have 6 test your knowledge questions. So let's see if we've figured out the polls after all these weeks. I'm going to launch a poll here, and hopefully you should be able to see the question. So tell me, what is this species? Okay, we're getting a very decisive answer here. I'll give it just another couple minutes. Not a couple minutes, that would be a very long time to sit staring at the poll. A couple seconds is what I meant. All right, we've got 66% participated. Anybody care to wage a guess so that we can get over 70% participation? 67%, last guesses. Okay, I think we're done. All right, so the overwhelming majority of you said that it was a bay-breasted warbler, and you are indeed correct, because you can see that very nice bay or chestnut color right on the warbler's breast. A couple people said blackpoll, and I can understand that, because I did say that one of the key diagnostic features for a blackpoll was a black head. That's what blackpoll means. Remember, with the blackpoll, you're seeing the cap rather than the cheeks as black. The cheeks are actually white. And also with the blackpoll, look for the orange legs, which are quite different than most warblers. Cape May warblers, you're seeing more of a chestnut patch on the face as opposed to a fully black face, and you're not seeing that bay breast. All right, so next question. This one I think is maybe a little bit harder. Okay, forgetting how we launched the, aha, got it now. I think Jenna ran into the same problem last week. We probably should have talked about it. Okay, yep. As I expected, things are a little bit more split on this one. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. seconds. Again, when I say seconds tonight, just assume I mean, but when I say minutes, assume I mean seconds. Oh, we've got over 70% participated this time. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, last guesses. And we'll end the poll now. Okay, so a small majority of you said Nashville, which is indeed the case. So it is a Nashville warbler. Some of you said palm, which I do understand because I said with the palm warbler, you're looking for that rusty cap. The Nashville warbler also does have kind of a rusty chestnut cap if you look pretty closely there. It's not super visible in the field, but you can see it in this photo. A northern parula, you're going to see more of a blackened chestnut band across the breast. And a Tennessee warbler, you would see an olive green back and white underparts as opposed to these yellow underparts. But again, Tennessee and Nashville, both named after places, I really do struggle with those. All right. So our next warbler. Who have we got here? Okay. Oh, we got over 70 again. Last guesses. All right, we hit 80% this time. Excellent. People have thoughts about this one. Okay, but this is another tricky one with the answers pretty evenly split. 51% ovenbird, 44% northern water thrush. Those were the tricky species that I put in there, and I did that on purpose. So what we have here is an ovenbird. It's a little bit tricky because one of the things I said that you're really looking for is an orange and black striped crown, and you can't really see this guy's crown. So it's a little bit difficult, and they both species have those kind of boldly streaked breasts. However, with the ovenbird, you've got that very nice eye ring, which just makes it look a little bit surprised about life. Whereas on the water thrush, you would expect a buffy eyebrow over the eye rather than an eye ring. Water thrush, you'd expect longer legs as well, so they're quite a long leg species, whereas the ovenbird is quite squat. Okay, and what about this guy? Okay, no fooling you guys with this one, it looks like. Okay, oh, we've got 82% participated again. Excellent. It's so nice to see people answering these questions. Once again, we have an overwhelming majority saying it's a black and white warbler, which indeed it is. Blackpoll warbler thrown in there again as kind of a trick question. They are both our black and white stripy warblers. With blackpoll, remember you are looking for that black cap on top of its head. So black cap, white cheeks, as opposed to that stripy black and white crown that you're seeing on the black and white warbler there. Also with the blackpoll warbler, you can look for the legs. You can look for those orange legs. This guy has black legs. Okay, and just two more. All right. This one is a little bit trickier. You'll notice that it is not a super clear photo. And it's not quite as close up. And things often seem blurry and not quite easy to see in the field. So you don't always get the really nice views that we've been showing in some of our photos. Sorry about that. We'll just let a few more answers come in. Okay, all right. Sorry again. All right, we'll end the poll there. So yeah, this one was a little bit trickier. In this case, a majority of you, 58% of you got it right. It is a female American redstart. So with that gray and sort of yellowy orange coloration. It's not a Nashville warbler. You're seeing a wing bar there, so you would not see a wing bar on a Nashville warbler. It's not bay-breasted. You would expect a little bit more of a breast band there. Now, I admit from this side, it does look a bit like there's a breast band, but you can see that the middle of the breast is whitish as opposed to a band that goes all the way around. Sorry, I was talking about Parulas there. I skipped right over the bay-breasted warbler and went straight to Parula. All right, and we have one final one to go. Okay. So who is this guy? Okay, we'll give it just a few more answers. We're at 74%. Okay, last guess is in, last question of the night. And thank you all for participating in these polls. It's really fun to see the answers come in. Okay, so things a little bit more split on this one. This is one of our budworm warblers, which is the Blackburnian and the Cape May. This is a Cape May warbler, very brightly colored, but doesn't quite have that flame orange throat of the Blackburnian. And instead of a black, or in the case of the female, gray cheek patch, you see a chestnut face patch there. So you're seeing not quite the right facial markings for a Blackburnian. The magnolia has that necklace around the front, although it does have a yellow breast with stripes that kind of trail down from the necklace but don't go as far down. And it also has a black face mask. And the common yellow throat, again, I can see it. It does have a yellow throat, but you won't see any markings on the breast of the common yellow throat. So it's not a common yellow throat. Okay, well done, everybody. Those were tricky questions today. I was intentionally tricky. As I said last week, Jenna is much nicer than I am. And that is it for this week. But luckily she'll be back next week. So maybe she'll be nicer with the quiz than I was. And Jenna, I can't remember what we're talking about next week. Can you remind me? Is it sparrows next week?
Yeah, it might be. It's a good question. Let me just
I think we're at sparrows next week. It's amazing how fast we go through these bird families.
It is, yep. Sparrows, finches, and grosbeaks.
There we go. That's next week. So we hope that you will join us again. And feel free to check out our website or send us an email. Check us out on social media. And yeah, if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Thanks, Catherine. That was really a great presentation, as always. We had some questions come in throughout the presentation that I answered in the chat. One person asked if warbler species are always breeding with their own species or if there's hybrids. So I mentioned that they do sometimes breed with other species, but it's fairly uncommon, except for in certain cases like the golden winged warbler and blue winged warbler, which we don't have in Newfoundland.
We do not. But then the question is, recent research has shown that those guys may actually technically be the same species, even though they look totally different. They are genetically extremely similar. So then are they actually hybridizing, or?
Tricky questions. I'm not a geneticist.
That's a deep philosophical question, and that's too much for me at this time of night. So
And then somebody else had a little tidbit that they learned about a Blackpool warbler and what it looks like, because it looks like it ran into a black pole and had a little bit of black remaining on its head. A little
That seems pretty reasonable. Yeah.
little tip for
Like a charged head down into a black pole. Yeah, that's
Yep.
fair.
But yeah, we're just getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, and great presentation, all of that lovely stuff. So thank you everybody for coming. Oh, somebody just asked, do you ever see chestnut-sided warblers?
I have not seen any chestnut-sided warblers here in Newfoundland. I do not believe that have they ever been seen here, Jenna? Do you know?
I think they have occasionally been seen, but they are not common here. It would definitely be a rare species to see.
An extremely rare breeder.
Yes.
Very, very, we would be surprised if we found breeding chestnut-sided warblers.
Mm-hmm. And then Barb asked, no black-throated blue warblers in Newfoundland. And that is correct. There are no black-throated blue warblers in Newfoundland, unfortunately.
Much to my sadness. I would love them, but then I'd have another species that I would have to say was my favorite. So
gets to be a long list of favorites at the end.
It does get to be a long list of favorites. Also, if we had too many more warbler species here, we would still be going, which
we would.
Okay, well, if we have no other questions, Jenna, did anything?
Oh, just someone popped in about the hybridization question. They said it's now forever more complicated since now we know that we have to get the geneticist to know the answer.
Very true. Extremely true. All right. Well, I think we'll say thank you all for coming again tonight, and we hope to see you out next week.
Thank you, Catherine. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night.